Afternoon, it's Matthew Holt. It is the 1st of September, 22. It's episode 103 of THCB Gang. I am your host. I'm the founder and publisher of the healthcare blog. You probably know that by now if you've been listening to this any length of time. Welcome to the live video for those of you watching, and those of you listening on the podcast. I hope you'll enjoy this when you pick it up a little bit later. And I have a great lineup today. I have faithful THCB contributor Kim Bellard, those double trouble futurist youngsters, Jeff Goldsmith and Ian Morrison, and adding a touch of class to the whole place, Lygeia Ricciardi, the CEO of AdaRose. So, hi everyone. Hope you're all well. I just realized I did not show what I was trying to show there, which is I've completely felt this up. So quickly catch up with everyone's name and issue. There we all are. So now we can see. So that's how to capture, how to see who's actually on the show today. I knew I was doing something wrong. It's one of those dog days of summer things when you're really screwing up. But anyway, all right, I will shut the hell up as I'm clearly not only barely compass mentis for the activity today. And I will start by asking everyone what they've been up to and where they've been and what they're thinking about. And ladies first, Lygeia, what have you been seeing?
Well, it is sadly, in some ways, the end of the summer. And so in my world, that means in part back to school. I've got a couple of kids heading back to school. So I'm thinking, among other things, about what does COVID look like this year, which I hope is not as much as of a conversation as it has been. But we're sort of seeing how that's shifting. And the other thing I'm thinking about is with my business with AdaRose, as some of you know, it's kind of about self-care and wellness. And I'm learning a lot that companies are really interested in that and trying to help them think about how to navigate wellness and health as people kind of head into a new hybrid work state that's, you know, part in the office and part at home. So those are things on my mind. And yeah, wishing maybe we had a couple more weeks before things heat up again.
Well,
or cool down, I should say.
Heat up, cool down, whatever. I know it's California this week is going to go into some, heat emergency everywhere apart from San Francisco is in the 110 region. But luckily, I'm actually heading up to Tahoe tomorrow, so it'll be really 115 on the way there. Jeff, what have you been looking at?
I'm a week into my rebound COVID infection, 29 months.
Oh man, I'm sorry.
I got ill a couple of days before I was supposed to go off on holiday to Hawaii. That went down the drain. I took my Paxlovid. I took almost 9 days of it, and my reward for it has been a week-long rebound infection. So I'm lucky 15 million people were killed by this disease. It was just like a bad head cold, but it's really been kind of a nuisance. It's been an experience. There's not a lot of interest in this illness anymore.
Well, it's like the rebound thing about that was pretty interesting, and I've been wrestling with some of reading Bob Walker's stuff and elsewhere. But had you had COVID before?
No,
the first one?
I mean, I was like, the first infection was I don't know. I was COVID positive on the 10th or 11th of August, and I had 3 or 4 disease-free days. That was it. So I've been sick most of the month.
Oh. All right.
Not my idea of a good time, but since social distancing is not a problem on my farm.
For the chickens.
Yeah, there's chickens, there's a puppy dog, there's lots of deer. I mean, they keep their distance.
And I am curious, my husband had it recently and I managed not to get it, and kids stayed uninfected as well. Do you have other people in the house that you're trying to quarantine away from?
Well, I mean, my wife got it about 3 days after I did. And I was asymptomatic when I transmitted it to her. So, I mean, she's had it. She was sicker than I was. A lot of coughing, a lot of congestion. She had a hospital visit. She had an emergency room visit. We went to Vermont and she visited an emergency room. The medical care system didn't help us very much. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah, on this topic, and we'll get to Ian and Kim in a second. I took Paxlovid, which I don't know, I was on the borderline about whether I needed it or not. I didn't get a rebound infection, unlike you and President Biden, right? Who both got rebound infection from it. Is he still ill? Is he better now? He's giving me a big talk tonight, so in a couple of hours. So hopefully he's doing okay. But I mean, it was very mild when I had it, but I did take Paxlovid. My wife I gave it to my wife as well. I was symptomatic when I gave it to her, but I didn't think I actually had COVID. So I was in a bit of trouble in the house. Although I quite enjoyed my 6 days being of isolation from the wife and kids, which was, don't tell anybody. But she didn't take Paxlovid, and she recovered pretty much the same as I did. So I don't know. And the data I've seen that after the big fuss about Paxlovid and the government buying it for you, the data I saw was actually there isn't much evidence that people who were unvaccinated did much better with Paxlovid. It seems to be that most of the evidence was that Paxlovid was much better if you weren't vaccinated and got COVID. It really helped a lot. But yeah, it's I think you're right. The big picture is like, and Kim's been saying this forever, that the pandemic is over, just no one told the virus about it.
Right.
Right. Well, and I'm, natural immunity. I mean, we've reached herd immunity, and it doesn't seem to be. I mean, we're still losing almost 500 people a day to this disease.
Well,
and it's like we have ceased to focus.
Absolutely. I mean, the other thing that happened is they just approved yesterday the emergency use authorization for both Pfizer's and Moderna's. I will get the name wrong, but it's the vaccine that deals both with the original COVID and the Omicron variant. And I'm about 4.5 months now, 5 months now post my infection, which I was using as my second booster. And I'm about to go on a big trip to Europe, and I'm not sure whether I should get the booster now, hope that the new one shows up in the next 3 weeks or 2 weeks, which may or may not have been authorized, or just go to Europe and blow it off and come back and get the one when I come back in a few weeks. But
I mean, I have trouble believing that I'm going to be using public transportation or be in public places without a mask on, regardless of how many. The fact that I have, now natural immunity. Thank you very much, Dr. McCary. 2 main vaccinations, 2 boosters, probably 3. I don't think it's going to help us all that much. I think this virus is way ahead of us.
A survey came out this morning and said, even among people who identify as very liberal, the percentage of people who viewed COVID as a major risk to their personal health dropped from 47 to 34 just in the last 6 months. So even the people who've been most concerned over these past 2 years have just thrown their hands up and said, it's here, live with it.
Well, the other 2 things that I've seen going on, right? One is there's now starting to be some investigations into long COVID as to how, you still meet the people, you still see people around who've had long COVID, and it's debilitating for a long period of time or forever. And then the other thing is that the Chinese just shut down another big city, like a 12 city, and what they have a different opinion. Anyway, Ian, you've been not on the beach, in the mountains and the valleys.
In the mountains and the valleys of Idaho and Canada. But I hadn't seen Jeff since I got COVID at the American Hospital Association's meeting, which I thought was appropriate. Oh, yeah. And tested positive the same day as Biden.
That speaking that Jeff turned down and made you take instead.
Yeah.
Was that a second?
Oh, I'm on their do not call list. I haven't done anything to the AHA in 25 years. So I'm safe on the farm.
You're saved by the bell. Yeah, there wasn't a mask in sight. Anyway, so I did the same thing, Paxlovid, got rid of the cough, was fine. To Lygeia's point, no, my wife actually is of relatively high risk with asthma conditions. So I was up here in my little office for 6 days, isolating, watching, golf reruns, total isolation. But anyway, we managed to avoid passing that on. But really interesting being up in Canada because, nobody was wearing masks at this golf tournament I was at in Calgary, but Canadians are still required to wear masks on planes and are very, very strict about it. Domestically, I flew from Kelowna to Vancouver, and then on the Vancouver leg, it was a Canadian operator, WestJet, so they still were wearing masks. But when I was in Europe earlier this summer, nobody's wearing masks. I mean, it's what Kim said. It's like, I think I call it the don't ask, don't tell part of the virus. People are just wandering away. I'm glad I
was going to say one thing is extraordinary. So in Asia, I mean, it's still Hong Kong has just cut down now to 5-day mandatory quarantine if you're traveling out.
Yeah, because my niece just went back with her wee boy, and she just had had 3 days of quarantine going back in.
But they were genuine. It was like New Zealand was in the start of the pandemic. They were genuine quarantine farms, right? There's actually a
Oh God, yeah.
place where they actually put you in a little bit of porta cabin and lock you away for and until you got a negative test, especially with positive, you were staying there for a long time. And I've had a friend of mine who's probably, I think he's an American guy, lived in Hong Kong a long time, flips between there and Shanghai, probably be arrested and being lost in an internment camp. It was on there was an excerpt put on a WhatsApp group that we're in of him talking to some chat radio. I didn't know they had chat radio in Hong Kong, but about how it was debilitating to Hong Kong business wise to run it like that. And if you run it like America, yeah, there are acceptable risks, but I mean, his opinion was we can't go on like this. You can't have a society which shuts down. And there's an argument that way because early on in the disease we were told we were shutting down to kill the virus and to maintain the healthcare system, being able to deal with what was coming at it. And it's clear that, and then we thought the vaccines, with good reason, the vaccines would stop it in its tracks, and we didn't get enough people vaccinated. A, and B, the virus mutated damn fast, way too fast. And yeah, it is endemic. But yeah, you're right, Jeff. There are still 300, 400, 500 people dying each day. So we're not at 1,000, 2,000.
Almost 500.
It's real.
And though I also need to bring up that one sort of risk of letting people or doing too much to shut things down is the kind of mental health risk, particularly to younger.
Sure.
I can tell you as a parent of 2 tween girls who have a lot of, we know a lot of people in that age range, and there's a lot of challenges, definitely in downtown DC, all kinds of mental health challenges. And I think that's partly because kids spend too much time in quarantine and frankly on TikTok and everything else. But I mean, you guys have seen the data, there are major issues with that.
No, sure.
So there's kind of risks no matter what you do, I guess.
When you talk to teachers, what they've experienced in the last year in terms of the behavior of their classes has been much, much worse. I have a couple of very good friends who are, teachers of my kind of age, so they've been doing it for a long time, and they're saying they've seen, and this is not, these are, by the way, these are not like in inner city DC or Baltimore. These are teachers in Marin County, California, right, where you'd think it's like a nicer, higher echelon class of people, people in Mill Valley are not, are having a lot of issues with behavioral issues with kids, so I think that's probably going on the whole way. And it is true. I mean, it's not we didn't come up with that, and we also haven't done a great job in doing some of the stuff we could have done, like ventilating buildings and taking other basic
things like that. That would seem like that would be a really great place to start, because guess what, it may impact things other than COVID too. Nobody wants, say, strep. I mean, there are all kinds of things that are contagious. Why not use the opportunity?
There was money in the COVID bills for changing the ventilation system in schools. I'm just not aware that anyone has actually done that.
Well, hopefully hopefully there's stuff happening, but it didn't seem to be the fine priority. I haven't seen anything happening in my school anyway. I mean, and there is a thing that I haven't got to you, Kim, yet, but if you want to get off COVID and talk about this Inflation Reduction Act that passed the other week, there is some money in that for all kinds of stuff, but a lot of the money, especially for the energy side or on the healthcare side, is in tax credits to be, that people will not pay tax for later or get a credit back for later, rather than direct money to go and spend on stuff. I don't know if that was how the COVID, the ventilation stuff in the original infrastructure bill went. I don't recall.
So Lygeia mentioned schooling. There was an article today that elementary school kids have dropped 2 grades in math and reading during the pandemic.
Oh.
And by the way, our mortality rate has dropped 3 years in the last couple of years. And by the way, one of our state capitals can't provide clean water to its residents. President Trump, or ex-President Trump, talks a lot about us becoming a third world country. I think he may be onto something, although not for the reasons that he says.
No, it's true.
Should all come. Well,
yeah, but Gio's point, I think, is right. I mean, everything I've seen on the mental health side with kids, and certainly my own experience with nieces and nephews who are in that age range, it's just been horrible for them. There's just no upside. They've been socially isolated. They're online too much. They're not, motivated to do stuff. They're missing out all the socializations. It's just been really, really hard. Yeah. It's just profoundly, you know, I mean, and that broader health consequence. I think, you know, when the history is written of all of this, the handling of schools and you know, will probably be one of the bad points of the Biden administration's response, certainly. And it's not that there were any easy answers, but it's you know, the kids have paid the price for it.
You know, you look at the distribution, at least, of mortality, and I mean, it's all over 45.
Yeah,
over 45. So I mean, even the teachers fall into the category of you know they got hit, but they weren't hammered. So, you know, I mean, I think a lot of the, you know, the conservative narrative on the schools was, you know, if, you know, we should have focused better and maybe left them open. And I'm not sure, you know, I'm not sure what would have happened if we'd done that.
So, I mean, this is, it's worth diving this a little bit, because I happen to live nearby the place where there was the JAMA study of what happened when a teacher went to school. It was in Nevada, California, which is in Marin County, right up the road from me. What happens when a teacher went to school with COVID, right? And what happened was the teacher, they mapped out the classroom. The teacher gave about 50% of the class COVID, especially people sitting relatively close.
15 or 50?
50% of the class COVID. Now,
they took it home to their parents.
The issue is, right, the kids didn't get sick much, right? So you've seen the uptake of the pediatric vaccine. The people who waited for the 5 and above one, that uptake was kind of okay. And some schools forced it on. Now you can't force vaccines on anybody anymore. at least not in at least not COVID ones, and probably not other ones now too, because of the law changes and the Supreme Court and what have you. But the uptake of the vaccine between the 0 and 5, or 6 months and 5, has been negligible, like very, very low. We also know that there's been a lot of concern. I know it's been overhyped, underhyped, but you are running it to young males, you know, sort of in the 15 to 25 group, who've had heart conditions as a result of the vaccine. Not many, but some, enough to, right? And then there's the answer is that, well, they weren't going to get it. Those kids weren't going to get it bad anyway. There are relatively few kids, you know, who actually had real problems with COVID. So you should let them get it. The question was early on, would they have spread it to their parents? You know, and the answer is probably yes. You probably would have had a much worse pandemic earlier on. But there was, you know, I think a lack of responsiveness, which already has had political implications, especially in Virginia, your state, Jeff, in Virginia. Basically, the governor got elected because the school boards and the school districts didn't really seem to be very keen on opening back up, you know, and there were some, San Francisco is my local example here, where they just, you know, they basically took the whole year off and spent a lot of time discussing name changing of the Washington High School and whatever, without really seem to be interested in getting the schools back opening up. And that's why the school board got voted out, because parents, you know, people like me and Lygeia who've got kids in the school system going, want them back, I want them out of the house, you know, I don't really, at some point I don't really care, you know, I've kind of lost interest in you know, in the wider solidarity of not having the condition spread. And I think that's now, you know, everywhere.
I mean, this is a super important point about how connected all the different pieces of our social system are. Because, you know, if we, you know, how much of the current labor market unpleasantness had its origins in the closure of the schools, the collapse of the daycare system, I mean, and its disproportionate effect on women, working women. I mean, we, you know, a lot of the people that pulled out of the labor market, pulled out because there was no place for their kids to go. And, you know, and we just, I mean, you know, it seems like we're not learning enough. I mean, and on the other end of it, you know, our nursing home capacity is shrinking. Nursing homes can't staff up. So older people that come into hospital emergency rooms can't be placed. And even though they're not acutely ill, they end up sitting in observation beds, in some cases for weeks at a time, because there's no place for them to go. Ditto with the mental health system, is that there's no place to put someone that needs to be in a locked unit. There aren't any locked unit beds. So, I mean, this is the part that I find so frustrating, is that this pandemic should have taught us how the different pieces of our society fit together and enable us to actually live a productive life. And I mean, forget about all the anti-vax stuff and the demonstrations and all the rest of that crap. We didn't learn from this episode what we needed to learn.
We learned the wrong things. I mean, if anything, it pulled us apart more than it put us together. You know, say what you want about our response to 9/11. People pulled in the same direction. It might have been the wrong direction, but it was the same direction.
For
This
about
one
4
has
months.
torn the country into pieces.
Yeah, but again, this is sort of classic because it's mostly unseen, right? Most people don't know or don't have experience of people. Well, I mean, yes, New York had that horrendous first bit, and then some of those other cities were really badly hit. You don't see, you know, nursing homes are not front and center. Most people don't live in generational families now where they see, you know, their elderly relatives dying or getting in trouble. You don't, you know, that's a problem that one of those typical problems you only notice when it happens to you, right? When you're trying to find some place for somebody or what have you. And it doesn't, you know, that happens to a lot of people, but not to enough. And you know, the other thing which I would argue is that, yeah, you know, we got to this position, so we kind of crept there. We like visible and short things, right? And the problem with the post 9/11 reaction is it got transmuted a bunch of other stuff, and you know, we had 4 or 5 things in that brief period of time after September the 11th, and then it kind of got transmuted into, well, let's go invade some other country and, you know, whatever. We can't hold it together for a long time, right? And I would also, you know, point out that we did get the Inflation Reduction Act, right? We did get somehow, and I don't know how it happened, and I'd love any insights somebody has, but Manchin changed his mind on stuff and having said yes and no, and you know, yes and no, and then, you know, pull the football away from Lucy. No, sorry, Lucy pulling the football away from Charlie Brown all those times. Finally said, you know, yes to something, but it didn't include all that caregiving stuff.
Right. Yep. And that was the big loss. And it's interesting. I think, you know, Kim just said it with his little gesture. There wasn't enough interest group pressure. These were poor interest groups that would have been helped. I mean, you know, I had a conversation with my old friend Alex Drain about getting something in the Washington Post and trying to begin to generate a little bit more political heat behind the whole caregiving thing. And she, you know, I mean, I don't know what happened to all of that stuff, but we flushed almost $2 trillion in the oh good Lord, was it the very first recovery bill?
Yeah.
That ended up in retrospect being really probably not necessary and counterproductive to inflation. And we didn't do the infrastructure stuff that we needed to do.
Yeah.
Well, you can argue about that, right? Because the PPP thing was done in a very messy way. I'm actually experiencing that there was a lot of interest group buried in that, right? For a start, the banks got paid, what was it, 1% or 2% to administer these loans, did it very badly, right? Then all these other people set up and started doing it and didn't do it. You know, there was a lot of fly-by-night operations just in that PPP money. I'm now discovering that there are a whole group of people wandering around small businesses saying, I will get you subsequent things, which are in, I think, also in that, I don't know which bill they're in, but there's a thing called there's an R&D tax credit, and there's an employment recovery. There's another, if you're a small business, you can get another tax credit, and people are going around getting 10, 15% of that money that they recover, you know. So there's still a little industry there making money. We know there's a ton of fraud in the PPP. And we also know that a bunch of thanks to the White House getting its new social media representative, this very aggressive young lady from New Jersey, there's a whole bunch of Republican congressmen who are decrying the student loan, you know, forgiveness, who also got PPP and got that forgiven, including Marjorie Taylor Greene and a bunch of others. So, you know, but I agree, it wasn't very credible, you know, sensible way we spent the money. We could have spent it in much cleverer ways. It did have some good impacts, right? We had that child tax credit for which you know, got a lot of kids out of poverty, and you know, but we spent a lot of money very quickly, and yes, it wasn't very carefully kept as to where it went.
That's what puzzles me. I mean, to Jeff's point, I mean, I understand why we didn't want to fund the long-term caregiving, because we've been terrible at long-term care for a long time, and you know, it's invisible to a lot of people. So not spending money doing that, I understand. But the child tax credit was extremely popular, extremely effective. You know, everybody loves children. That and the child care subsidies for actual child care. Why those things don't go through is beyond me, especially the child tax credit. We're never going to get a better tax credit than that.
Right.
Does
Yeah,
anybody have an idea as to what happened with Joe Manchin in the first place? Why did he come back and say yes? I don't understand it. Did we
Who
have
knows?
better compromise?
It's really interesting to note that his poll standing in West Virginia has dropped 30 points since he flipped.
Well, didn't he get some West Virginia coal concessions of some sort?
No, I mean, this is his popularity among West Virginia voters.
Wasn't that part of the negotiated bill that he got some concessions for West Virginia industries as part of the bill?
Well, the main thing that he got was a promise that the permitting process for oil and gas drilling would be streamlined. And it looks like they're going to end up welshing on that promise.
Yeah. I would hope so anyway. They're coming out.
No, I mean,
say our old friend Bob Lightman used to call it Lightman's Law. You know, a lot of politicians first be vague and then you lie.
oh, great.
It takes a lot of attacks, but the two things I'll say are that the next senator from West Virginia is not going to be a Democrat. So, hate him all you want. He's not going to be a Democrat. Right. And every bipartisan bill that's gotten passed in the last 2 years has Joe been involved in it. So he gets things done. He doesn't get all the things done that people want him to, but the things that get done, he's got a hand in.
Yeah, I'm not criticizing Joe Manchin. I mean, he had, in retrospect, his concern about the trillions of dollars that we were going to be continuing to throw at the economy was dead right. And he's not going to get any credit for that at all. He was concerned about the inflation effect. What was it? Him and, the president of Harvard. There was two people. That was it, and we're going to be living with the consequences of overheating our economy for probably 5 years.
Yeah. No,
I forgot about all that stuff.
Are we going to talk about the student loan thing? Anybody have concerns about that?
No comment.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I'm kind of with the White House Twitter account, right? If you're going to forgive PPP, which predominantly went to, relatively well-off small business people, had some impact on but basically going to, and there wasn't just that. Since, and I'm not sure how much this is on the Trump administration, but since the small business loans have been handing out guaranteed 30-year loans of pretty considerable size to a lot of small businesses that are probably never going to get paid back either. There's been a lot of other money, sent towards small businesses to get them going, which in general is going to people, who are a bit further up the economic scale than, and I don't want to mention the other types of corporate welfare that have been going on. But, so I feel a bit, the student loan thing, it was a promise in the election. It is a guarantee, it's a constituency that was maybe wavering before the midterms. So, you may not like it as policy, but as politics.
Oh my God! But the idea of passing the bill for this on to our grandchildren is the one that makes me want to vomit. I mean, the idea that you put it on the tab and just add to the burden that is going to fall on young people who aren't going to have a tenth as much of the opportunity as we did. That's the part that really bothers me.
I agree, but the
intergenerational. It's intergenerational vandalism.
That is okay. It's true. It's been passed on, but the people who have gone to college in recent years to run up these big student loans because they were kind of, as young people, told that was the way to go, and have had less opportunity than people of our generation. I think I get why that perhaps need to be more off politically. I get why it was done. It was promised. There are a lot of things that were promised, by the way, that didn't happen. I'm still waiting for my Medicare public option. I'm waiting for Medicare age 55. Bunch of other stuff, which was.
My big problem with it is not the policy. My big problem is that how in the world can it be done by executive action? I mean, how does the president have the ability to do that?
Great question, particularly since it's a $300 to $500 billion expenditure.
Yes,
it is an expenditure.
It is.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought it up, Kim, because I still struggle with that. How doesn't the Congress have to approve this in the final analysis? But I think I'm no expert in this, but in the reading of the press, I think Joe Biden and others, and maybe the president himself, was leaning more towards 2 years prospectively free community college rather than forgiveness of loans, which might have been more palatable to those who are against it. But I agree with the deficit and debt on our grandchildren point. I think that's absolutely
Why not ask for something in return?
Yeah.
I mean, why not ask that in exchange for, for giving $10,000 or $20,000 in debt, that the public gets something for it?
Yeah, right.
It's just a gift. I mean, it's classic, New Deal interest group payoff politics.
There's some university that I forget who it is, but they've got a program where you pledge a portion of your future earnings as a way of paying off your student debt, which I think is a great idea. It's fair.
Yep.
It's like equity.
Yeah. They're buying a stake in your future because they're making your future.
There's a couple of fintech startups that do that as well. You will and they'll agree a contract with you, and you pay off some portion in the future. There's also a very healthy market in baseball for that, where a bunch of agents pay pay young players and say, okay, we'll take care of you, and we'll pay you more than you get in the minor leagues. But when you get to the majors, where you owe us 10% of your $200 million contract or whatever it is.
But all these colleges that are talking about how much their graduates make, this is a model fit for them. It fits with their investment bank approach to endowments.
Right.
And especially because college has become really unaffordable for many. It's just gotten ridiculous in recent years. It's absurd.
Well, and that's the whole other problem with the student debt thing. It doesn't address the problem. I mean, it's like medical debt. You could wipe out people's medical debt, but the system is going to grind up more debt. Higher education is going to grind up more debt.
Well, and not to be special pleading or anything, but the inflation in college tuition, what people are actually paid, outstrips the inflation in medical expense.
I don't think people realize
process. That. It's administrative bloat. It's trying to leverage your brand. I mean, it's just and they haven't gotten nailed at all.
When I go on college campuses these days, I see lots of new buildings, and I see these huge, student unions, gyms. I'm not sure they're investing in better education. I think they're investing in amenities.
Of life stuff, like look at our amazing cereal bar, and we bring, puppies at exam time, and we do, which I'm not saying that's inherently bad. Quality of life is something, but I'd rather see more emphasis on, keeping costs reasonable, but quality of education, harder to measure. As in healthcare, quality, hard to measure, but essential.
But here was the grift, is that the point of an advanced degree or a college, a BA or an MA or whatever it was, there was a presumed payback in the availability of jobs that would enable you to pay back those loans. Okay, there was simply an unspoken assumption that if you got a degree, that you entered a new stratum of society where there were unlimited opportunities. That's bloody rubbish. And what we've seen instead is is degree inflation, where people have like a minimum requirement of a master's degree to do a certain kind of work that doesn't require any master's training. That we've created this sort of Mandarin system as almost kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy to justify the people tacking on 50 or 100 or 200 grand in debt with no guarantee at all that there was actually going to be value created for the society as a result.
Even in healthcare, now nurses pretty much have to have BSNs, physical therapists have to have at least masters, pharmacists have to have essentially PhDs. I mean, we've jumped that level, and I'm not sure that extra time is being spent in clinical.
Kim, there you go. And you talk about the opportunities to begin saving money. One of the big opportunities is unwinding all of that protectionist garbage.
Yep.
I hammer on my hospital friends about the all BSN nursing workforce. And I'm like, isn't there an appropriate division of labor? Where you're not just feeding the machine more and more BSN graduates.
Right. My wife was a nursing coordinator when I first met her. We got into this raging argument in the 70s about all BSN staff. I said, have you never read Adam Smith and the division of labor? But they were, the model was the 1972 Dutch World Cup team, so total football. Anyway,
I missed that one.
I'm not sure Jeff.
Matthew
What the heck did that mean?
No,
it was total football where everyone could play in every position,
Yeah,
and they all
yeah.
had to be amazing players.
Right, exactly.
Couldn't have somebody
exactly.
who's just a very good left back.
Exactly. Well, Matthew got the metaphor.
I got the joke, but
It's an
nobody else did.
obscure soccer joke from the 70s. But,
You know,
I mean, it's an important conversation because one of the things I wanted to get your take on, because we've got the right group here, were two of them. One was the Amazon thing, because I haven't seen you all since that went down. But the other is just, I was looking at the Kaufman Hall flash report and just the dire straits the hospitals are in right now. And it's all this, you know, it's connected to what Jeff was saying earlier. You know, the costs are up, the labor's up, the revenue's down, the surgeries are back down again. You know, they're all sucking air, and the labor costs are through the roof. And I mean, in the long run, we've got to get cheaper people doing things more efficiently, rather than the ever escalation and exalted humans laying on hands. You know, I mean, it's that might explain why we're seeing guys like Mark Harrison bail out, you know, at the peak of his career, to go and become general catalyst rather than run.
Well, I suspect
arguably the best health system in the country.
Creating a $7 million job for a $30 million job.
Yeah, there you go. There's that. There's always that.
Well,
Yeah, I mean, you know, Ian is right. I mean, you know, these are the worst financial conditions I can remember in the hospital field. I mean, you probably have to go back to the Balanced Budget Act of 1998 to find something that kind of snuck up on people. It's sort of like long COVID for the industry. But it's really obvious what it is. There is a widening wedge between the prices that people negotiated in some cases before COVID for the services that they're providing and the delivered cost of care, which is still growing at close to double digits, thanks to all this labor market nonsense that we were talking about earlier.
Right.
You know, you negotiated rates. I mean, it's just been an enormous gift to the health insurance industry.
Absolutely.
You negotiated rates that had no idea that you're going to be seeing 10 to 12% escalation in clinical personnel costs.
So, well, and does it tie back to Amazon's decision? Because, you know, we're seeing the self-insured employers getting like 7%, you know, is the number I'm hearing from a lot of folk, and maybe pushback on that. And the other thing on the hospital side is the payer mix, because I mean, the Inflation Reduction Act kind of extended the 3-year provisions on coverage, you know, with the exchange subsidies and so forth. So, you know, you've got even more public payer payment mix problems for hospitals going forward. So I don't blame these guys from bailing out, because I don't see an easy way out of this in the short run. Well,
other than we're not all being offered, you know, 30 million jobs by leading venture capital companies, which, you know, is upsetting to some of us, of course. But, you know, I'm on the bailing out front. I'm wondering how long this is going to go on. So this goes back to the inflation thing, right? Which is, you can argue the inflation, if you're a good Friedmanite, you can argue that the inflation is all from the extra money that was spent. But we've been spending extra money for a while. I mean, obviously not as much was spent during post-COVID. We've been spending extra money since 2009, haven't really stopped, right?
Right.
And that hasn't led to that much inflation. There's clearly, the other thing is that we have had massive supply chain dislocation, whether it's chips from Taiwan or oil from Russia or gas. You know, have you seen a utility gas bill, a utilities bill in Europe? I mean, they're going up by a factor of 4 or 5. I mean, you know, that's going to be really, really, really tough. But, you know, hopefully we can send them, you know, candles or something. And then, you know, and then the last part is the labor shortage, right? Which goes back to the childcare stuff and goes back to the experience that we talked about during the first lockdown, which hasn't got better. And it's the reason why, you know, I mean, Kim wrote an article about this. No prizes for guessing the gender of the people who tend to do nursing or childcare or nursing home care, right? Those are the ones who can't get out of the house. And so, yes, the ones who are left are you know, making hay while the sun shines. I don't know how long that goes on, right? Do at some point do we say, well, there's a correction now, but the nursing rates, you know, it's a bit like the housing prices. They went crazy about too much, but they kind of stop. And then does the rest of it catch up? Do the hospitals go back to the employers and the plans and say, yes, it's going to be another 10% and we're going to go back to normalcy? Or are they permanently stuck and really have to do something? I guess that's my question.
I'd be really interested in Lygeia's take on this, because, you know, if a very large chunk of the people who quit because they hated what they were doing, hated it, I mean, that they were being treated in a way that wasn't
Yeah.
consistent with their own values, that they weren't being respected, that they weren't being listened to. You know, are they going to come rushing back to jobs when that they can't stand to be in, when when their household incomes begin to get pinched? It really does beg a question.
It depends on their other opportunities, I think, obviously.
Yep.
I mean, nobody wants to go back to a job that they hate, male,
Right.
female, however your workplace is. But I think at the end of the day, when it's like, hey, we don't have enough money to pay the rent or buy the food or whatever, people are going to figure out alternatives. And at that point, it's like, do you have to go back to being a nurse or a teacher or whatever it is? Or are there other options now? Are there other
Right.
fields that you can step into? Not in part, you may have other opportunities, because I think one positive thing that has come out of the pandemic is that a lot of workplaces are more flexible about hiring. And I've seen a lot of articles about, hiring anywhere in the country or outside of the country, even at similar rates for all kinds of other jobs. So that sort of opens up markets for many people, not necessarily if you're a nurse or somebody else who has a very sort of hands-on, often a blue collar job. There aren't as many opportunities, but there are more options, and at least for some people, and I don't know how it's all going to go.
As I remember the data, the worst job losses have actually been in retail and hospitality.
Yeah.
And
Followed closely by
most of those
healthcare and
workers,
education.
most of those workers did not pull out of the workforce. They just said, the hell with retail and hospitalities. I'm going to get a better job somewhere else.
Yeah.
So I think the answer is, in those industries and in healthcare, maybe they need to make the jobs better.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. No,
Well,
I
Part
think
of that is wages, right? Retail hospital, I think, very low wages. There are obviously healthcare workers, particularly long-term care, nursing aides, lower qualified workers getting terrible wages. But for the problem with nurses is not, I mean, the job was horrendous, but it's not they don't get badly paid. They get pretty well paid.
Well,
Well, but
depends
it's
on where you
part-
live.
Maybe I'm wrong, but
Depends
but
on
it's
where
partly
you
that,
live.
but it's also partly all these other demands we place on them. I mean, tell me a healthcare worker that doesn't feel they have all this bullshit to deal with, including
Like
patients.
50% of their time spent typing, for example, stuff like that. I mean, if this is a catalyst to actually redesigning what people do and eliminating a lot of the BS, then maybe there is some positive gain from this. But a lot of that cushion that enabled people to stop doing stuff they hated, the $2.7 trillion increase in household savings, Matthew, really isn't going down all that fast. It's going down by $100 or $150 billion a month. And it's not all at the upper end either. So I think to answer your question, this could go on for a couple of years easy.
Yeah.
And I think it really is going to be a kind of a gut check moment for the younger folks that replace the Mark Harrisons and the Scott Elners and the rest of the, the people that are kind of turning over now. It's the 40-somethings that are coming into those jobs that are going to have to face up to the reality of why should someone work for us? What's the value proposition for our workers? Why should they come to work for us as opposed to some private equity firm or, Optum or whatever the heck it is? The people that can't answer that value exchange question are the ones that are going to end up having a real problem.
Yeah.
So let me toss in something, a question that Ian raised a while ago, because we didn't get this. You lot, I've talked about it and I've written about it, haven't talked about Amazon and what happened with One Medical and closing down Amazon Cares. But you could make the argument now that Amazon had a good look at saying, can we create a employer-based capitated value for money hybrid care model, which we can come in and underprice the current market the way they've done it, or outperform or whatever, out-consumer the current market the way they've done in lots of other industries. Be consumer first, do that, start with employers, and then move on to like unpin Iora from One Medical, which they bought, and then do it for Medicare Advantage, and go down that direction and saying, could we build a nationwide non-hospital based delivery system, and to challenge the Intermountain Sutters, Baptists, etc., Ascensions, etc., and really go after their quote unquote surplus capital, the way that Farzam Mostashari says that AleDate is doing, if you read his tweets. But anyway, if you said he could have done that, Or we could, go back to One Medical, which is aligning itself with the high-price hospital systems and is a very expensive primary care system for upper echelon people in profit in Tony neighborhoods of big metro areas. And they've made their choice, right? They closed down the one that unless there's something going on behind the scenes, they've closed down the one that sort of had the chance to transform healthcare, and they've gone with the one which is the kind of Whole Foods of sort of primary care, as it were. So maybe maybe it's the choice is left. We're stuck with we're not going to see a change in the big health systems. You guys have been right the whole time, and I've been wrong the whole time, which wouldn't surprise me. We're going to have those big health systems running the show for as long as they like, and how they deal with it is what we're going to get.
I mean, honestly, this company, Amazon, has hypnotized a whole generation of pundits and forecasters and all the rest of it. I think this is a hapless company. I think they're just completely lost. I don't think they have the faintest idea how to generate a return on the cash that they're generating today. I'm a Whole Foods shopper. I've watched what they've done to my Whole Foods here in Charlottesville, which is one of the busiest ones in the country. They've just sucked the life out of it. And one of the people that was leaving, was taking her retirement package, said, what's going on here? The hippies are getting old and dying off, and the MBAs are taking over. And I just thought that was such a great line, because the MBAs aren't doing very well. The return on capital is going down. The stuff that Amazon is pushing through their system that is their own brand isn't making any money. 3/4 of the cash flow in the company is being generated by selling their infrastructure, Amazon Web Services, to other businesses. This is not an impressive organization, guys. And I think it's just going to be so much fun to watch them continue fumbling in our field. They don't have the faintest idea of what they're doing.
Should they be forced to divest AWS? Broken up?
Why?
Because it's a different business. I mean, it's
So,
completely.
the real problem is, what's their business? What business is Amazon in? There's no coherent answer to that question.
Fast delivery of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, you argue, but as Jeff says, most of the money, right, comes from AWS, which, by the way, is not cheap. Having not particularly customer friendly. I've had to move. I've had to move some databases I own from one to another. It's been, they run up. They basically email and say, if you don't move them, you're going to close down. To my tech team a lot of effort to do, and they're not.
It's a commodity, Matthew. It's a commodity.
I should move it to Google or something. You're right.
And,
but
the barriers to entry aren't as great as many people thought. Yeah. Why on earth did they create their own delivery service? Why did they build all those distribution centers that they're now trying to lease to somebody else? These guys had no idea where to put their money.
Well, can we go back to why they left, and are they really gone? Because
that's the question, right?
They simply, as I understand it, and you guys have been debating this for a couple of weeks when I was rampaging through Canada, but it seems like they have pulled the plug on the employer offering directly, right? It doesn't mean that are they going to sell One Medical? I mean, or.
Let's dive in a bit, right? Because what they had and what they were building, and they bought Aaron Martin over from Providence, to a couple of years, 18 months ago, whatever it was, to do more of this. What they were building looked to me like a telehealth first. We can send low-cost people to your house second, and then eventually they announced they were going to build clinics, right? Don't forget, they already have Scott Shreve and Crossover doing their clinics at a bunch of warehouses, right? So they've got a bunch of, and that looks more like the Oak Street Iora kind of model for like capitated, in clinics, worksite clinic primary care. If Brian Klepper was here, he'd tell us whether that's true or not, but we're close enough. But I mean, I was assuming they were going down that path to build something that looked like, Bob Margolis for the 2020s. Or Friendly Hills for the 2020s across American employers using new technology. That's what I thought they were going. And One Medical is a strange beast because the Iora acquisition, which I still don't understand because it's such a different market than where they are. But the main part of One Medical is it's primary care for Google employees. It's primary care for people for companies who don't give a shit how much their employees' healthcare costs because they're young and healthy and they make $400,000 a year per employee in revenue and don't really care about the healthcare costs. And, if you look at One Medical, I've written about this, and people, it's bloody expensive. It's not saving money. It doesn't do much.
It wasn't a business, Matthew. Sorry? It wasn't a business.
Well, the other question is, how does One Medical manage to lose as much money as it does, given the amount of money it charges? That's what I don't know.
There isn't. I mean, I said this when they did the deal. One Medical never answered the question of whether it was actually a business or not, and now they don't have to. Now it's up to Amazon to prove that it's a business.
I'm cynical about. Honestly, unless you put downstream risk in the primary care physician's hands, I don't think it really matters what you do with primary care, because they're not saving any money for anything.
Kim, that's exactly. Bob Margolis taught me 30 years ago, there's not enough money in primary capitated care for a business. So it really gets down to, are you going to be able to get a source of subscription on top of that? And that's where I thought there may have been some potential, because the one time I visited One Medical, Amir took me around, and they had armies of programmers. That was really the overhead drag on the deal. Right. And if you could find a way to have a big parent with better technology, amortize that cost, maybe there's a way. But I think Lygeia, your business is sort of oriented towards that higher end, presumably, subscription type model. And I'd be very curious in what you're seeing and hearing, talking to customers and patients about willingness to pay for additional subscription, because you could see, Matthew, the One Medical, because they're already I'm getting Facebook things. They're branding Iora as One Medical 65 plus. Is there the beginning of a concierge Amazon service that they're going to get really behind, fine tune that, and then add some of the things later on? Weren't they rumored to be in the pitching for Signify?
Yeah, they still are, and we'll see what happens with Signify and whether.
But I'd love to hear what Lygeia thinks about the whole subscription model.
So my business is pretty young and is still mapping out a lot of its pieces, but I think that there's definitely a willingness and openness to pay, honestly, right now we are serving kind of those more well-to-do customers, but there is a lot of willingness and ability to pay to make quality of life more comfortable, less overwhelming, and that's part of the same thing that's attracting One Medical customers. And I admit I am one. I know Matthew is as well. I'm not sure which of the rest of you are, but it's not like, for me personally, the added cost for One Medical isn't super huge, but the kind of value in terms of time I save and headaches avoided is massive. And I think that, again, it doesn't solve, I don't see One Medical solving the problems of the whole system. And right now, I don't see AdaRose solving the problems of the whole system, but trying to make life better for a particular part of the population when there is willingness and ability to pay for that. And that's improving the lives of people who nevertheless have a lot to contribute and are overwhelmed and maybe not able to contribute it well.
And particularly in the environment you described earlier, for young moms and families who have been through the ringer over the last 5 years. I've got 2 30-something kids with little babies, and for a couple, $100 a month, they'd give you in a heartbeat to make their lives a little bit easier right now for anything.
Absolutely. There is exactly a segment of the population for whom a little bit of money is worth almost anything, because even though they have money, see, it's easy to say like, oh, they're well off, don't worry about them. I'm not saying that there aren't other people who have other arguably greater needs, but a lot of people who may have some flexibility on the cash side of things are nevertheless totally overwhelmed and basically breaking down and unable to do all that they need to do to sort of be healthy. And so if you help that segment, you're helping them presumably not only be a better parent, caregiver, etc., not get sick personally, be a better worker, which ultimately sort of fans out and helps other folks. Again, it's different from my policy experience, which is blatantly trying to, how do you help those people who need the, arguably are at the bottom of the chain and need the most help? I had to go through a lot of thinking about, like, do I feel comfortable, serving people who are in general not sort of in the worst of straits in that regard. But I do, because it doesn't mean that they don't also need a lot of help and that they won't be able to contribute back a lot more to society if they're healthy and well and whole and best able to participate in the workforce and in, caring for families.
Yeah, no, look, there's a need. And by the way, Matthew and I will tell you that 30 years of survey research, we find that 7% of Americans is the number who will trade up with their own money. I mean, it's not everybody, but the 7% of a big number is a big number, and you're doing good for those families, and for those people.
Well, and realistically, honestly, like, that's where I'm from. So I can see that perspective. I live it.
Right.
So I figure I'm better able to address that, or that's what I'm better able to address than many other circumstances.
Right.
Oak Street Medical seems to me like medical scribes. It's like, instead of solving the problem, let's add another layer on it.
Well, I mean, what's what
I described scribes.
What Ian said. I'm not sure I agree with that Oak Street, but I think, I could see One Medical, right, acquiring something like an AdaRose or a business big. What other, now Amazon's there, what other things you could layer in with Whole Foods, and that's it. And to me that finds the business, right? And I know I give
Let's get
One
that rumor
Medical,
going. Oak Street is going to acquire AdaRose. Yep.
Oak Street might do we'll see what happens with that one maybe, but what I do see, and I rag on One Medical for their incredible, their ability to charge incredibly high primary care fees, especially as my kid now has to go back to be looked at every 3 months to make sure he's behaving for his ADHD meds. And it's $517 a visit, which is coming out of my HSA. So the HSA is now getting blown. The doctor was getting blown every year. And I'm not going to be able to put it in my stock trading account, which is probably just as well, because it would go down faster and he wouldn't get his visit if it was in the stock trading account. But anyway, to me, I can see that coming. I'm just saying that, my part that I wrote up on THCB this week was that if they're not, and maybe Jeff's right, they were full of crap in the first place and the company doesn't know what it's doing, but nobody seems to be coming to build out the cheaper alternatives. So all the conversation we've always had about, if you cavitate, integrate, communicate, or whatever Ian used to say years ago, you can do it for 30% cheaper, and can we scale that? Nobody seems to be, no one seems to be coming for that. So we got what we got.
I think Buzz Cooper blew up the 30%. You keep seeing that number over and over and over again.
Yep.
And Buzz Cooper, Poverty in the Midst of Health Reform, it's worth reading.
Yep.
Nearly all of that 30% was driven by poverty, by social determinants, by huge gaps in the social infrastructure. And a lot of that variation, that famous Dartmouth study where you compared New Haven to Boston.
Yeah.
You were comparing metropolitan New Haven to inner city Boston and wondering why Boston's costs were higher and blaming it on all those specialists and hospitals. It was bloody rubbish.
Yeah.
So on the third use of bloody rubbish by Jeff for this 1 hour, we're done. We are out of our time. Yeah. I love it. So real quick, we're going to go around just for the last minute, 20 seconds each on what's going to happen next. Nobody mentioned anything to do with national security documents being spread across the floor of Mar-a-Lago, but I'm sure if I ask Kim, he will.
Well, I want to see tonight whether Uncle Joe shows up or Dark Brandon.
Lygeia.
What I'm going to do is not get COVID, even though I've already received a notice that my kid has been closely exposed.
Good luck, Lygeia.
Thank you.
Well, Jeff.
Good luck to you, Jeff.
Thank you. I'm really wondering how much carnage the hospital financial problems that we talked about earlier, just brushed over, is going to create. I think you're going to see a lot of management teams just thrown out on the street by panicked boards who do not want to see billion-dollar quarterly losses in their income statements. I think we're going to see a lot of dislocation and a lot of angst in our field here. And I'm going to be following it closely because those are my friends.
Ian.
It's same deal. I would just echo that. And I heard from a client this morning about layoffs amongst physician leadership thing as just a sort of symptom of what Jeff's talking about. So I think there's a real bind. Just a follow on too is I think we're going to have a big conversation about who's actually making EBITDA money in healthcare right now. If it ain't Amazon and it ain't hospitals, it's health plans and PBMs. And I think that conversation is going to get more intense as the everything squeezes over the next few months. So I'm going to be watching that one as well.
Fantastic. So with that, we're done. That was a wild hour around the block of all different kinds of conversations, from COVID to health systems to nursing degrees to Amazon to to a bunch of people being thrown out on the street. Although, you know, they'll need their care packages from Lygeia. You've been listening to THCB Gang. Matthew Holt, your host. Guest today, Kim Bellard from Cincinnati, Jeff Goldsmith from the beautiful hills of Virginia, Ian Morrison back from Canada in Menlo Park, and Lygeia Ricciardi from the wild inner city of Washington, D.C. Thanks for listening to us, whether you're watching on the video or catching us on the podcast later. We'll be back next week with another gang for a few more weeks before I disappear into Europe at the end of the month, which may mess up our schedule a bit. But that was the THCB Gang that was. Thank you very much for listening. We'll see you very soon.